and welcome to another episode of Cloud Security Podcast, where I do virtual coffee with Ashish. So I've got another topic over here for our identity access management one, which is the secret management for modern applications. Now, I've got a few people coming in as well. Hey, morning, Vineet. Good to see you, man. So, as I said, this is a continuation of Identity Access Management Month, but I have my music queued in for another return guest of ours. Let me just get this music going. Hey, welcome, Dylan. How are you, man?
Good morning. How are you?
Good. I hope we attracted a lot of youth just by that song. They've just been like trending. Oh, I imagine all the trends coming out of this, whatever the TikTok trend is with all this. I'm gonna. It'll be really interesting. Hey, Zenith, welcome. I've got a few people coming in as well, man. So first of all, as you know, the ritual. I've got a coffee instead of coffee cups. I've got a water today because I've been drinking 2 coffees already. But what you got, man, for drinking?
Well, look, I gotta respect your format, and of course, for me, that means drinking coffee with Ashish. So I got a coffee here.
Nice. We've got a few more people. Hey, Rama, nice to meet you. Nice to have you as well, man. So maybe so people would already know who you are based on, I guess, people who've been following us from season 1. But for people who were not in season 1 and did not watch our bug bounty episode that we did with you on Google Cloud, can you give us a bit of intro about yourself and how you got into cybersecurity?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Dylan. For those that are watching, been in cybersecurity for a while. Started in the kind of consulting space, doing a little bit of bug bounty work on the side. Did a little bit of work in politics a while ago. Eventually came out to the Bay Area and worked for some big tech companies. Most recently, I was at Netflix for a bit. I was at Salesforce before that on their in-house security team. And then about a year ago, I decided to quit my Netflix job and start an open source cybersecurity company that's kind of centered around secrets detection and secrets management.
Sweet. And that's TruffleSec as well, isn't it? That's the anti-TruffleSec against your name. But
yeah, TruffleSecurity is the name of the company. Thanks for reminding me to mention that part.
Yep. No, all good. And I think I'll probably say this because we've been doing Identity and Access Management Month, and a lot of people somehow always feel like kind of like identity and access management. You're like, oh, identity is easy, right? Username, password. I feel it's the same with secrets as well, and secrets and passwords. Where I mean, yeah, what's so difficult about storing passwords? It's I find secret management and identity and access management to be probably the most unspoken subjects and in a while. And now you have a whole company dedicated for this. So I'm curious, how do you define secret management, and any examples of secrets for people who may be listening in and going, why this secret management? Why what's the big fuss around this?
Yeah, so when we talk about IAM and cloud and things like that, let's first define what a secret is. So a secret is basically like an API key, a token, a private key, those types of things that are sensitive. So as we're going multi-cloud and we're integrating with more and more SaaS providers, those credentials are kind of the glue that holds all that together. And when you like, to answer your first question, like define what secrets management is, in my mind, it's split into 2 main parts. The first part is, where do we want these secrets to live? Like, they are the most sensitive, they're direct access to production data. And because our clouds are sitting on the public internet, if you have access to one of these keys, that's it. You don't have to be in a private network. You don't have to do any sophisticated hacking. You just talk to a public API with public documentation and you pull all the sensitive data. And so the first part of secrets management is, well, these things are super sensitive. Where do you want them to live? So you have to answer that question. You have to define that policy for your organization. And then the second part is, how do you enforce that? Especially as your organization gets bigger and bigger, how do you make sure that it's all the places that you want them to be and none of the places that you don't want them to be? And so that's when I think secrets management, those are the 2 parts and the 2 pieces that organizations have to become mature at, so that they can lock down those, what I would argue is the most sensitive assets that you have, is just the keys that give you direct access to your production data.
Yeah, it's funny, as you mentioned that, I'm just thinking, the number of passwords I deal with, and for people who are watching the live stream right now and probably are going to watch the replay of it, I'll be curious if they want to put in the chat how many secrets on an average an individual has. I think we have so many passwords that we manage on our own as well, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's like personal credentials. There's like things that log you into different websites and stuff like that. And then there's like corporate credentials. There's like how to, web servers talk to each other. How does a web server talk to a cloud API? And usually the way we manage those is different. So at a large organization, when you define policy for where secrets should live, usually you have one piece of software for storing personal credentials, something like 1Password or something like that. And you might have 50 or 100, right, for all the different things that you log into in a given day. And some of those might not have anything to do with your job. It might be like your Facebook and your Google and things like that, things you can't have single sign-on for.
Yeah.
And then on the corporate side, an organization could have tens of thousands, if not more, different credentials for how all their servers talk to each other and how they talk to cloud APIs, how they talk to SaaS providers. So, it in aggregate, an organization could have easily hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of different various forms of credentials.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious as people who are listening in or watching later on, if they want to drop in the comment or live chat, how many secrets do they think that they have? I was just trying to think as you were giving the answer. My 1Password account is definitely filled with over 100 passwords at this point in time, and like these are accounts which I've forgotten about. But you almost like, yeah, you want to have random password everywhere, but it's insane, man. The number of secrets we deal with is, at this current day and age of modern applications. But maybe that also makes me think like if we have that many kind of secrets, what are some of the biggest challenges around the space and for managing
Yeah.
secrets?
I mean, I think what's interesting is like at face value, you kind of hinted at this earlier. It doesn't seem like the flashiest, most sexiest security problem to
Mhm.
tackle. Like especially when you hear all these reports about NSO Group using this 0-day to hack into the iPhone with 0 clicks and things like that. That's kind of what ends up in the headlines and where everyone's mind goes when they think about security. But when we actually look at the trends, like where the most common data breaches coming from, hackers are more than happy to follow the path of least resistance.
Oh
So
yeah.
most breaches involve one of these credentials in some form, a stolen or a guest credential. And usually it's just because it's in some place it shouldn't be, or someone's reusing a password in a way they shouldn't be. So
Hmm.
the challenge is really just the sprawl. And it comes down to those two things: is where we want them to live and where do we not want them to live. And when you have them scattered all over the place, or you're reusing them between services, and then that other provider, their credentials get leaked out and can be used for you, because you've chosen the same password for two different services, or an attacker gets access to a laptop, and then that laptop gets access to a Slack, and then in
Mm.
that Slack the chat history has like a password or something like that. I mean, that's literally how the celebrity account takeover happened at Twitter last year. When Elon
Right.
Musk was like, I forget what it was, you send me a Bitcoin, I'll send you two back or whatever.
Yeah.
That was because somebody posted a credential to their internal Slack. It's a hard problem. The bigger your organization gets, as you get thousands of developers and they're coming and going, you got interns coming in and out, and everybody
Hmm.
has to know where they should live and know where they shouldn't live. And one person making one mistake could be the whole farm.
Yeah.
It becomes a bigger and bigger challenge for organizations.
Yeah, I did not know about the Slack thing because I mean, I guess was that because Slack is not encrypted? Is that, I think there was a lot of conversation going on for some time where Slack, all comms on Slacks are not encrypted or something as well.
No, so I mean, like you might be referring to like end-to-end encryption, but that wouldn't have actually helped in this case. So like what you're describing is like, should I be worried about Slack, the company, being breached, and then someone steals all the chat messages at Slack, the company, and then it has my chat messages, and some of my employees have sent passwords and credentials. Like, yes, that is a thing you need to worry about, in the universe of supply chain. But this was actually a lot simpler than that. This was just, I think if I remember the story correctly, some developer had, or someone who worked at Twitter had malware running on their machine. That malware had access to that user's Slack session. And then that session was sold on the black market. So then someone purchased that Slack session, right? They said, let me see what organizations you have Slack sessions for. Oh, Twitter. I want to buy that. So he bought that Slack session, and that gave them access to the same messages that the employee had access to. So regardless whether or not those messages are encrypted at rest or not, if the employee had access to the messages, the attacker got access to the messages.
Wow.
So then, because there was a sensitive credential in a public channel that employee could otherwise normally access, that gave the attacker access to the same data. That data had a credential, and then that credential was used to log into some administrative portal that gave them the ability to take over celebrity accounts.
Wow. Wow. That's insane, man. I just remember I think everyone that I know who uses Slack already has a policy that you should not post anything sensitive into Slack. But I guess it's a great example to share when people are questioning why does it matter? It's Slack, right? We've got a few more people coming in. Hey, Belay. I think for some reason name doesn't come up, but hello. I mean, in case you guys are girls are wondering, we are talking about secrets, and how many secrets do you have? Just post them in the chat over there while you mind. I got a question here from Brahma as well. Where do we categorize maintenance of secrets? I can see people start with 1 and 2 heavily, but don't think much about this part. Maintenance of secrets is
so that's a good question. So like you have where should they live, right? And you have like a bunch of vendors that do that. Like that's where your Doppler or your Hashi or your AWS Secrets Manager, like they provide a solution for that. And then you have like where do how do you enforce that? How are you scanning all of your wikis and your Slacks and your CI log outputs and things like that to make sure those secrets don't live there? And that's where something like like Truffle, the product that we make, comes in. And then you have maybe like a different other question, which is, okay, well, we've defined where they should live. How do we make sure that the access is as minimal as it needs to be? How do we make sure that the secrets get rotated on some basis that makes sense for cloud keys, where that might be easier to do? And honestly, a lot of that is still immature, like as an industry. Like we don't necessarily have good practices around making sure credentials follow least privilege and that they're being rotated. A lot of vendors don't even give us the ability to create least privilege credentials. They just have a binary, you create a credential and it has access to everything, or you don't. So I think as an industry, some of the nitty-gritties of the management side of things, we're still maturing as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Oh, whoa. This is not what I wanted. I was just going to come back. I was trying to put my back on the screen. You can hear me, right?
I can hear you, yeah.
Perfect. So thanks for answering that, because I think he was talking about more rotation and versioning as well, because I think there's a follow-up question from Chris. Hi, what problem does TruffleSec solving? Are you able to answer who your competitor is? I think big open source one, I don't know who competitor is, but I don't know if you wanted to answer that question for Chris.
Yeah, so I mean, we are an open source product that's been around for a little while now. Basically, what TruffleHawk does is it identifies API keys and credentials in places that it shouldn't be. So it scans things like Slack, it scans things like log CI outputs and things like that. And it has coverage for more credential types than any other vendor that we know of. And I think what really sets us apart, I don't know any competitor that's doing this, is we're more or less giving the technology away for free. I'm a huge believer in open source, and I think that transparency and security is a really important thing. And so, I think that blend of cybersecurity and open source and transparency around secrets detection is really unique to us. And so, one other thing I'll call out is, if you're following along with us on Twitter, you'll see we're constantly open sourcing new things and constantly making it easier for people to use these free open source tools. We have a bunch of really big things that we're going to be dropping in the next few weeks, so stay tuned, and you're going to see some really awesome free open source tools around the secrets detection space that are going to land soon.
Cool. Hopefully that answered your question as well, Chris, and thanks for talking about why the open source perspective as well for transparency. That's pretty awesome, man. And that makes me question the fact that, because last time I had you on the show, we were talking about bug bounty in Google Cloud. And is there like a parallel, or is there a similarity between secret management and bug bounty?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So like secrets are like a subset of bug bounties, right? So like if you go out and do bug bounties, if you find a secret, a company's going to pay you a big, chunk of loot for that, and they'll pay
Yeah.
you for other stuff too. But like an example is recently someone found a credential that was packaged into an Electron app. I believe that if maybe I'm conflating two different bug bounties, but if I remember the story right, this company I think was Snap, and I think they
Oh,
paid
right.
$15,000 for that credential that this
Wow.
researcher found. And so, one of the things that you would have had to do is like unpack this thing and like manually go through and look for the key. That's the kind of thing that we're helping out with. And so, one of the tools that we're going to be open sourcing soon is something that can like auto detect certain types of encoding. Like, is in a zip? Is it base64? And without having to do any of that work yourself, it'll just automatically unpack that and do that scanning. So bug bounties, I used to use the open source Truffle to find all kinds of keys and made a bunch of loot off of that. Some of these companies are transparent enough to talk about the keys that they've leaked out. They make these bugs public, and you can see how many thousands of dollars they pay every time one of these keys leak out. And I think that's another cool thing about open source is it's, yes, this open source tool is used by big enterprises to prevent these keys from leaking out, but it's also used by just individual hackers to find keys that have already leaked out and help make some side scratch and submit these bugs to larger companies.
And that makes me also wonder if, I mean, I guess you touched on this earlier, the path of least friction that you mentioned. If you're able to find a password in GitHub, it's so much more easier to kind of just like use that as a bounty thing instead of trying to find the most complex 0-day or it's a complex cross-site scripting that you can find on a website. Instead of that, you just basically work with, hey, I found your secret. I imagine it's a lot more valuable to find someone's secret if it's an admin user that you find a secret for. Um, I also this also makes me wonder now, if you're talking, there are so many parallels, and we have a lot of applications that we use in cloud these days. GitHub that you just mentioned as an example, Slack we spoke about as well. Now we're also seeing multi-cloud and SaaS services. I guess I'm going to pick almost like a pool. We have one pool of SaaS services, one pool of I guess SaaS services that support our day to day, and then there is a whole multi-cloud angle as well. How is the whole shift to multi-cloud, which is getting more common, how is that affecting this whole managing secret space?
Yeah, so I think what's really interesting, like to build on your previous comment, when you said like, Al, if you have admin password or something like that in a repo, like that, that's you can get paid out more for that potentially. I think what's interesting is like it used to be if you found a password or a credential in a repo, you might have had to be on an internal network to be able to use it. So like a company that's running its own data center, that all their servers are talking to each other and they're not using clouds and things like that. If you found a credential like that that was accidentally leaked out, maybe somebody put it in a paste bin, somebody put it in a repo, somebody put it, wherever, put it in an Electron app, you could submit it, but then there's no way to demonstrate impact. You couldn't directly use it because you had to be on their internal network. And maybe an attacker could put themselves on an internal network by, phishing an employee or something like that. But as a bug bountier, you can't do that. But as we're shifting everything to cloud, and not just
Mhm.
cloud, but multi-cloud, right? The ability for these clouds to talk to each other. You can't give an instance, as far as I know, in one cloud, a role binding to be able to talk to an instance in another cloud, short
Yep.
of exporting a key and giving that key to the instance. And so if that key leaks out, the bug bountier can just directly talk to the public cloud API. There's no need to
Oh,
be on an internal network. There's no need to have any other hacking pieces as part of that story. And so you end up with these huge breaches like the Uber breach, where every single user in Uber had all of their PI leaked out, as well as every driver had all of their driver's license numbers and all of their social security numbers leaked out. Um, and then the hacker ransomed Uber, the company, $100,000. They paid the ransom. The whole
wow.
thing's a crazy story. We made a short video about it on YouTube. But that whole hack was one AWS key committed to GitHub. There, right?
Wow.
It's just direct access to the production data, like straight right into the point without lateral movement, without moving from one box to another, without getting access to internal networks or anything like that. It's one key to a cloud API. And so our move to public cloud is good in a lot of ways, and it helps us centralize policy, and it helps us, standardize on security best practices. But I think one of the biggest challenges that's coming with that is all the APIs are public. And that means that these keys are becoming more and more sensitive. And when one of them leaks out, the more we're going cloud and the more we're going SaaS and the more data we're putting in those places, the bigger the impact of that type of event becomes.
Yeah, I almost wonder how many people are not noticing that the landscape is also getting quite complex as well. To your point, the ongoing demand for every product should have an API, a public-facing API. Why can't you be transparent about API? But that also means that if secrets are out for those APIs, anyone can use it on the internet. You don't have to be inside the network. And so does this mean, like, there is this whole concept of source of truth for passwords usually, and like a lot of people would say, especially in enterprise context, put the SSO on, like single sign-on on, use SAML, have source of truth. But are there? I mean, I imagine it's quite important. But are there any examples of complexity around this for secret management?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the first and foremost thing that I would say is if you can remove the need for an API key, absolutely do so, right? If you can introduce
Yeah.
singles or passwords as well, if you can introduce single sign-on, and you can make it so that there's one fewer password or one fewer key that needs to exist. If you can give an instance an IAM role binding instead of giving it a key, do so. Like it absolutely helps with this problem. The sprawl, right? The
Yep.
randomness, the keys going this way and that way and no consistency, that's what leads to breaches. And when somebody breaks into an employee's laptop or something like that, the first thing that hacker is going to do is they're going to go to your wiki and they're just going to start reading. They're going to figure out how your internal environment works. And if you don't have a unified strategy that's centralized and really grokkable, then they're going to go to the wiki page that outlines the worst setup of all of the 1,500 setups you might have, and they're going to use that as their path in. And so it goes back to my previous comment. The most, of the two pieces, the most important thing that you can do if you're starting to think about secrets is coming up with a policy for where you want them to live and centralizing on that, making that the source of truth. And then after you do that, that's when you can start locking that down and making that, enforcing that, making that least privilege, and adding all of the extra security bits on top. But having that centralized source of truth and that standardized policy is super, super important.
Yep. And I think to your point, I imagine with the identity, well, we spoke about identity sprawl, I think a couple of episodes ago, but how many people are you're not even thinking about the secret sprawl. It reminds me of one of the companies that I worked for ages ago. They had this central shared network folder where all the access keys were stored because they didn't have a password manager of some sort. But it's an internal network drive. But I wonder what they're doing in this work from home world, how that, or what happened to that network drive now. But it's really fascinating that people are actually just completely ignoring some obvious things about secret management. I've got a few more questions over here coming in, so I'm gonna just switch gears just for a second to get to them. Belay has, hey Belay, nice to see you, man. I heard a lot of companies migrate to Microsoft Teams instead of Slack. Some of them use Slack with a warning that don't post sensitive information. How did you see this thing how do you see this thing from a security perspective? Migration is not a good decision. How about Discord? I think we touched on the Slack before. Maybe that's where the question came in.
Well, I think that's, what kind of our bread and butter is making sure you have coverage in all of the different platforms you're using. And so whether that's Microsoft Teams or Discord or Slack, we want to make sure that in all of those places, you have some sort of detection mechanism and prevention mechanism in place to find credentials that are posting there. What becomes, I think, dangerous is, have you heard the term shadow IT before?
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically, like, you work at a large organization and that organization puts out a controversial policy. You can't use that software or something like that. And then your employees use it anyway, but you don't have any visibility because you're pretending like it doesn't exist or like it's not allowed to be there. And then you create this adversarial relationship between you and your developers who are doing the thing that you've told them not to do. And then because they're using those things anyway, all of the keys are end up going there, but then you don't have any coverage to be able to detect anything there. So I think what's important is, as a business unit, you recognize the technologies that the company needs to be productive and do their jobs, and then you
Mhm.
work within those needs. And so if your developers are using Microsoft Teams, or maybe your developers are split, half of them are using Teams and half of them are using Slack, you need to sort of embrace that. I would not recommend, necessarily coming out with a policy that would be confrontational of like demanding that people use a particular piece of software, but instead work with them to recognize that they are using those technologies and then
Mhm.
figure out what you need to do to secure those relative platforms. So, we might handle the secrets detection piece, but then beyond that, to your point, you got to make sure these things are both using single sign-on. And then you got to make sure, maybe your message retention is locked down, maybe your app install stuff is locked down so that nobody can install arbitrary OAuth apps and things like that.
Yeah.
So I think, I wouldn't be prescriptive about you have to use that chat form or this chat platform. Instead, I would just operate within the universe of what does the company need to do its job, and then what can we do to make sure that those pieces of software are centrally managed and secure.
Yeah, I think that's
Or,
a good point, because it's easy for us to imagine that, yeah, because everyone in the company using Slack, they would just switch to Slack and everyone's on Slack. But I know for sure there are a lot of companies, in the name of communication, there are WhatsApp groups, there are Signal groups, there are like all kinds of stuff. And I mean, it's only like, I think for one of the companies that I worked for, we had our incidents were coming out on Signal group. Like, I'm pretty sure there were passwords shared over there as well, because Signal, everything's encrypted or whatever. But yeah, to belay your point, it doesn't matter if it's Discord or Slack or Microsoft Teams. I think the question would just come down to, you more probably want to encourage a good practice everywhere, irrespective. Just recognize, to what Dylan was saying, that hey, accepting the fact there might be multiple messaging boards in the company, just gonna find the integration and hopefully manage the secret effectively. I've got a few
yeah.
more. Sorry, go on, Dylan.
Oh, I was just going to say, I've worked for a company that's tried to ban Slack. And you know what that resulted in? That
What?
resulted in about 100 shadow Slacks popping up, all without single sign-on, all without any centralized policy or anything like that. And so it's that's, in my view, banning software like that never leads to a good result. And then to your point about Signal, if the attacker has access to your laptop, they have access to your Signal, right?
Yeah,
And
that's
so
right.
what could be important there is maybe message retention. Like, it's a setting within Signal, but that doesn't mean everybody turns it on. And so if you don't have the history blowing itself out, all of a sudden you've got 5 years of keys that you've shared back and forth with the people you're talking to. You get malware on your laptop, attacker gets access to your Signal chat, and then 5 years of history, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's a good one. Good reminder for everyone using Signal to make sure their messages are disappearing after a certain time. I've got a few more comments. Oh, I think the individual might have mentioned identity federation. This is when we were talking about single sign-on, cross cloud authentication without keys, still impact, but no. Huh? Is that? Oh, I didn't realize that
Yeah,
was a possibility.
OIDC is a part of OAuth, and if your cloud provider supports that, absolutely. Like I mentioned before, if you can move off keys, move off keys. The problem is just not every SaaS provider and cloud provider has that option available to you. And some of the SaaS providers are actually really immature when it comes to granting third-party access to things. Like I mentioned, it's like you can only make a key and then you can't scope the key at all, right? So
Yeah.
the nice thing about OIDC is it's got this idea of scopes, and you can choose for your integration how much access you want it to have. But you might be working with certain SaaS providers that have no concept of scope, no concept of identity or access controls, and it's just literally your only option is to make this API key that has full access to everything. And we just have, that's just the universe that we operate in. So if you have the ability to move off of keys, move off of keys, but you can't do that across the board because some providers just don't give you that option.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because I have worked with a few organizations. I don't know if you guys had this with some of your customers or the companies that you've worked in the past, but there's always usually like a third party policy where, hey, if you don't support single sign on or if you don't support OpenID, which is that OIDC thing, you are they don't work with you because there's a security questionnaire sometimes ask that question as well, where, hey, do you support SAML? Do you support OIDC, the industry standards? I mean, it could be one of the things where you can throw it as a company requirement for every SaaS, but kind of like what you mentioned, I don't know how many SaaS applications out there do it for free as well, because I imagine there's an extra layer of cost as well the moment you use a single sign-on. Cool. Yeah, sorry, go on. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, I mean, there's a wall of sheep, I think, that people have put up for vendors that charge extra for security features. Some vendors might not support them at all. But I think when you mentioned there the security questionnaires, right? Your internal GRC team that has like this minimum list of requirements or whatever, um, you know, they can set those policies and then use them for meeting certain requirements. But I think the unspoken truth that we all kind of know is if an individual engineer needs Trello to do their job, they're going to find a way to use Trello to do their job. They're not going to necessarily send it through the GRC approval process or whatever, right? Or they need to use um, heap analytics or whatever it is, and they can get away with just throwing it on a corp card and not necessarily following every GRC rule. In a large enough organization, people find a way.
Yeah.
And so we just have to kind of operate within that universe and just instead of pretending like it doesn't happen and then it just gets out of control, right? And then you've got secrets in your Trello boards. We need to just create some exception process for that, recognize that it does happen, and figure out the universe that allows us to secure that as much as we can.
Yep, that sounds good. That's a great answer as well. Next, I've got a comment from Vineet. Hashicorp Vault could be a solution for multi-cloud secret management security. What are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, I think Hashicorp Vault has a product that answers the first part of the question, right? Which is, where should you put your secrets? It's a little bit kludgy to set up, but if your organization is large enough, it's got a lot of nice features and allows you to operate multi-cloud on-prem, like lots of different options available to you that answers that first question of where should your secrets live. Doesn't answer the second part of the question, which is how do we make sure it's in all of the places that it shouldn't be, right? And then it also it might be moving more in the space of like, how do we make sure that these things are locked down, least privilege, and making sure that our grants aren't as big as they need to be and things like that. But honestly, like a lot of the times, a security team still has to come in and supplement a lot of that. It needs to manually inspect what are all these keys, like why did this key have admin privileges for this small microservice that's just doing this small thing. And so, you could definitely set Vault as your standardized best practice. Everyone should put your keys here. There's usually some additional policy and help from security teams that comes along with that. But then you also have to answer some additional questions, like how do we make sure our keys aren't in other places, and how do we make sure the keys we're creating are least privileged and locked down?
Yep. And I think it probably, to your point, what we're referring to, the subtle difference is the fact of there's a secret hidden somewhere, which is not the Hashicorp Vault, which is the Hashicorp Vault would not help you find it, I guess. That's kind of where you're coming from. Is that right?
Yeah, HashiCorp Vault won't do secrets detection, so it won't, scan your Discord or your Slack or your Microsoft Teams and tell you what credentials are laying around there or in real time prevent them from being posted there or anything like that. All HashiCorp Vault is, it's kind of in the name, I guess, is it's just a vault for you to store your secrets. So you write your policy that says everybody should put their credentials in your vault, and you scream that into the wind into your 2,000 person organization. And then, you have some tool in place to actually make sure that people are doing that thing. And that's where
Sweet.
something like Truffle would come in. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, hopefully that answered your question, Vineet. And yeah, feel free to ask any more if you have any more. Jyoti as well. Oh, nice. You're using YouTube today, man. That's pretty good. What would be the best start for an organization to concentrate on secret management, mainly for recently migrated apps?
Yeah, it's a great question. It depends, I think, a lot on the size of your organization and like how multi-cloud you are. I think if you're in a single cloud, you don't have anything on-prem or anything like that, you may not necessarily need to use something like Vault. You might be able to just get away with using the native secrets manager in your cloud provider. So AWS Secrets Manager or the Google Cloud Secrets Manager or something like that. There's also some really simple off-the-shelf secrets products for like running things in Heroku. Like if you just want a really simple canned secrets manager, that's, you know, like a company like Doppler might come in. But the more sophisticated and advanced your architecture becomes, the more you have things in multiple cloud and on-prem or things like that, that's where something like Vault would come in. So the first step, I guess, would just be like survey your environment, figure out what your needs are, and then pick where you want your secrets to live and create a wiki page that defines that policy to make sure that everybody knows where you want those keys to live. And then the second part would be go find a solution that enforces that those keys are only there and aren't anywhere else.
That's a great answer. And hopefully that answers your question, Jyoti. Just realized that LinkedIn user is actually Kat Traxler. Hey, Kat.
Oh, nice.
For some reason, your name's not coming up, but Impact More Limited is an attacker would abuse these. Oh, okay. This is referring to the comment about the cross-cloud authentication. Now, thanks. Good to have you as well, Kat. She's also a previous guest as well. And probably in the Google Cloud security community as well. So maybe that's how she knows about all of us as well. So thanks for coming in, Kat. All right. So now since we've answered some of the questions that came in, we were talking about source of truth before we kind of switched gears. Now switching them back, you kind of answered, I guess, some of the next question that I had in mind, which was around best practice for secret management. So I'm curious for people who are starting today, and you've answered the questions partly with Jyoti, but it's for some reason, I find that scaling could be a challenge with secret management. And it's not just about, you and I have been talking about Slack, we've been talking about all these other applications, GitHub, Jira, Trello, the list doesn't end. And even if people are listening to this and thinking, we're a startup, I'm sure we don't have that many secrets, but I can tell you right now, I imagine there would be a lot of people who would just be, signing up for different SaaS applications and maybe even using the same email as your company email and password in those SaaS accounts as well, because, hey, I'm using it for my official purpose. I'll sign in. Is there a scale challenge to this as well, to secret management?
Yeah, no, I think what's interesting is a lot of people think of large organizations as, oh, they've got this problem solved, right? They figured their secret stuff out. They must have.
Yeah.
They figured it out years ago. But I think to your point, this is absolutely a problem that just gets worse and worse the bigger your organization gets, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And so while a small organization might have the problem in a tractable space, right? Let's say a really small startup that's got 10 people or something like that. You could get them all in a room together and you can communicate, here's what we're doing with our secrets. Let's all get on the same page. When you're a 2,000 person organization and your average turnover is 1.5 years for your engineers or something like that, you've got new interns coming in every summer. All of a sudden, any one of those people that makes this mistake and posts in a Slack channel or something like that could just directly give access to production data. And that's the end, right? Yep. This is a problem that just gets worse and worse and harder. The more SaaS providers you integrate with, the more multi-cloud you get, the more keys you end up with, the more developers you have doing weird things with keys, the more debt of the last 5 years of people doing that stuff. And maybe something was posted to a wiki page 2.5 years ago, and then the wiki page was updated, and you just don't realize that 3 versions old, that people can still access if that page still has that live key in it. It becomes really, really hard to do. And so I think the answer to your question of scale is like a security team cannot, they can't manually go out and find all these keys and put them in the right places. They can't do that on a small scale, and they especially can't do that on a large scale. If you have 2,000 engineers and they all over a year's time make this mistake once, and you've got, maybe in a best case, like 4 or 5 AppSec engineers or something like that, they all can't find thousands of keys and move thousands of keys over, right? And so that's where this term like shift left comes in. You've probably heard that term before, but it's basically for certain security problems, not for all security problems, but for certain security problems, we can empower individual developers to do to do the right thing and to take that security burden on themselves, because otherwise it just doesn't scale. We can't have a security team that's 2,000 people big. It just wouldn't make any sense. You'd be spending billions every year on your security team. And some companies, by the way, do spend billions of every year on their security team and still don't have this problem under control. And so that's kind of the philosophy that I have around it, is like when we go out and detect keys, it has to be the person leaking out that's driving the effort to remediate. And so we've kind of built some tooling around that where we try to figure out who did the leaking and then get that person on a Slack thread automated so that they can automatically do the cleaning up. And you don't have to necessarily pull in an engineer every time it happens, because if it happens, a few hundred times a year, a few thousand times a year, however often it happens, you're not gonna have an AppSec team that's gonna be able to scale to that.
Oh, actually, that's a good point, because I mean, there's a cleanup involved as well. It's not just about identifying you have leaked keys, but how do you do cleanup for, I guess, applications that may not be owned by you as well, like GitHub and all these other places as well. So, I mean, how do you see people address those? Like, to your point, GitHub, I just use that as an example. Like, do I just contact GitHub,
Yeah,
or?
it can be, well, like, I have some fun stories I can share. I mean, it could be a challenge, right? Like, let's say somebody's personal GitHub access token leaks out, and then this, like, again, this is why the person who leaks the key is the one who's most qualified and needs to do the rotation. If the
Yeah,
security team finds that key, there's nothing they can do, right? That personal GitHub account isn't centrally managed. It's not like they have any visibility into that key. All they
yeah,
can do is use the key. There's no endpoint that lets them rotate it or delete it or anything like that, right? And so you gotta, go find who leaked it out and get them tapped. That's why we have some tooling that helps with pieces of that. But I think to more to your question is like, when you have this sprawl of different SaaS providers and you have this sprawl of different cloud providers, if the security team is playing that game of, we're going to pretend like all those things don't exist, we've got this GRC team and this list of approved apps, this problem becomes harder and harder, because if you do find a key laying around to somebody's personal Trello board or something like that they've shared with their team, and you don't have that in single sign-on, you don't have any auditability there, you don't know who stood it up originally, it just becomes a really big challenge. And then on the rotation side, like, let's say you've tracked this key down, you know who it belongs to. You also need context around that key. How's it
yeah,
being used? When's the last time it was used? If I rotate this now, what's it going to break? And of all the different customers we're working with, I've only met one customer that was like, I really wish we could hard rotate this immediately after it was identified. And I was like, it's going to take production down if we do that. And they
yeah.
were the only person I know I ever talked to is like, we are so worried about this problem. We're okay with the production website going down if a key leaks out in our Slack or something like that. But usually, companies just don't have appetite for that. They want some lead time to rotate, to make sure that you don't have problems like that. So rotation is a challenge. I think the person who leaked the key out is usually the most qualified to be able to handle that. They have the most context around that key, how is it being used, and whether or not it's safe to rotate. We do our best to help provide some of that extra context. But yeah, it's a difficult problem, and I think it's something that the industry is still maturing and figuring out.
Yeah, because I think it's easy for Amazon to come and say that, hey, use Amazon keys and rotate automatically or whatever. But Amazon is just one of the components. There's just so many in any
Well,
organization.
like, let's talk about Amazon keys, right? Like, let's say an Amazon key leaked out, leaked out on the public internet or something like that. Your next step is saying, well, what's this key used for, right? You log into the Amazon UI or whatever, and you say, oh, this thing was used, it looks like once a day for the last month. So is it safe to rotate? Was that the attacker using, right? It's got all these open-ended questions. So even within Amazon,
Yeah.
it's still not always just straightforward, just immediately rotate it.
Oh, and also if the password was hard coded somewhere, that even you're screwed even more. Can't
Right,
even rotate
yeah.
it.
So I think if a credential is hard coded somewhere, the first step there is moving that credential over to a more secure place and updating your code to pull from the more secure place. And then the second step as rotation. Because if you do it in the reverse order, then you're going to end up hard coding the new key, right? So like it's a little bit of a complex challenge.
Yeah, 100%. Cool. I've got actually another question coming from Rama. It's funny, Rama. I was actually thinking of that question now. Do you think it's defining the best practice for secret management in first place, but implement any automated security policy kind of stuff to keep continuously monitoring to align to those practices? I guess very similar to what I was going to ask. So I think it's worthwhile bringing that over, because how do people monitor and react? I mean, I guess we got the reaction part covered. How does one monitor for this?
Yeah, I mean, so that's where our company has an open source solution that we also have a managed SaaS product for. Basically, we integrate in a whole bunch of different SaaS providers. So things like your Slack or your S3 buckets or your log outputs or your containers, your artifacts, all these different places where your keys are leaking out, we monitor them. And we can tell you instantly when a key lands there, even if it's several versions old. So like your 7 versions ago wiki page has a key. We go through all those old versions, we find those keys. We figure out who created that page. We get them on a remediation thread. That's kind of what we're building open source tooling for. And what's great about this journey of like creating this company and stuff like that is we get to give it all out for free. Like we're building this all in an open source way where people can access this technology regardless of how much resources they have, and they can run it. And the same exact tooling can be used for bug bountying, right? Because the same thing that's monitoring an enterprise, you can use after hours to go scour the internet, look through open S3 buckets and things like that, find keys, report them to companies, and make a little side scratch on it. And so all that's free to do, all that's open source and auditable and transparent. And we're going to be pushing out so many new features. We're going to be releasing a new scanning engine soon that's going to come with like hundreds of new credential types that we support just in the next couple of weeks. So follow along on our TruffleSec Twitter, linked on the bottom, and you should be able to see when those things land and play around with them when they come out.
Oh, and that's what, well, I'm going to definitely keep an eye out for that as well. I think there's another question to that part as well, where automating the security policy to keep continuously monitoring for align for practice. It's almost like you define the practice, but how do you monitor that people are aligning to it? Because it's just kind of slightly different to the whole, I guess, detect a key has been leaked into the GitHub repo. How do people do that kind of monitoring for policies are being still followed? Like I'm not saving my password in a shared network drive or something. I'm just making an
So
example,
I mean
but maybe better ones.
that's basically what we offer. Is we offer the ability to monitor and enforce all that stuff to make sure that people aren't sharing those passwords in Microsoft Teams or Microsoft SharePoint or any of those places where those credentials shouldn't live. So I think step one is figure out where you want your secrets to live, right? And we're not in that business, but I have a ton of things to say about it, whether that's Hashicorp or native AWS Secrets Manager, or Doppler, any of those things. So you can't go out and enforce something that you don't have a policy for. So step one is figure out where you want these dang things to live. And then step two is how do you make sure that they're not in all the other places, and how do you keep that enforcement in place and make sure that they're not leaking out?
Yeah, awesome. And having an ability to rotate them. Working with the person who actually leaked the key to be able to rotate the key in the first place. Sweet.
Absolutely.
These are great questions. Kind of keep them coming, guys. We spoke about monitoring. We spoke about scale as well. I imagine there's a maturity curve to this as well. To your point about start with one secret or one application, I guess, instead of just boiling the entire ocean. What are some of the recommendations, or at least the things that you've seen in terms of maturity scale for secret management across different level size of organizations?
Yeah, great question. I think to your point of like starting with an application, like if you are a security engineer, you just came in, you found there is no centralized security policy, you found people are posting them all over the place, people are putting them on wiki pages, describing steps and how to log into systems and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
You write your policy, but I think with that, to your point, it's probably really important that you kind of eat your own dog food, right? Deploy an application and use the steps you just laid out, because you may find that it's a lot harder to do than you think. So, start simple, start with just a dummy app that you put together, and then start with maybe your team. So any applications that your security team or DevOps team or whatever operates themselves, get all those things moved over, and then just in growing concentric circles, move over more and more applications until you shift over from that initial burden to just needing to have continuous monitoring. And so you're no longer actively moving things over. You've already communicated and messaged out to your whole org, this is what we want to do. Now you're kind of running in more of a passive mode where this thing is just continuously monitoring and automatically messaging people for you, saying, hey, this we don't do secrets that way. We do it this way instead.
Yeah, awesome. It's great advice as well. I think I can't imagine it being an easy problem to solve in any organization, especially if you have thousands of people in the organization, thousands of probabilities of what else could be using. Maybe it sounds like I should do an episode on how do you discover what applications are being used in your organization as well, to your point about the shadow IT and the shadow SaaS services.
I think for AppSec teams, I've heard certain AppSec teams say that it's literally the most important application security problem there is. Because if you think about an AppSec team that's going out and looking for problems, right? They're looking for things like SQL injection, they're looking for things like passwords and things like that. If they're only looking at the applications that they know about, they might go super, super deep on those applications and find out there's an application that's not being secured at all. And so for a lot of organizations, including Netflix, that built an application catalog and invested a tremendous amount of resources into inventorying all of their apps, for certain organizations, the most important AppSec problem to solve is just the question of what apps do we have and where do they live, right? And so like, asset inventory or like this, asset cataloging is a super, super important problem. It's, a different problem that, folks can go really, really deep on. But you're absolutely right. That is a super important security challenge, separate from, secrets that organizations need to solve. Yeah. And also, I think what's interesting about credentials is like, I am constantly surprised with all the different unique ways that apps are deployed and things like that, where those credentials could potentially leak out. And an example is, recently we're working with an IoT provider, and that IoT provider is making devices and actually sending them to people. And we had never even considered that use case before chatting with them, that the biggest thing this company was worried about wasn't leaking out a secret through their GitHub or anything like that. It was actually, they were worried about one of their developers accidentally hard coding a secret in an IoT device and shipping it to 500,000 people. And so when we started scanning their firmware, we started doing these regular scans on their firmware, we were able to stop AWS keys from going like 500,000 people, because that's, it's just a different type of, application deployment. But like, I guess that just speaks to threat modeling and asset inventory and things like that. Like, you got to grok the problem space and understand where your code and your assets are. And then always, if there's a big source of data, then there's potential for secrets to be in that source of data, I guess is the long story short, whether that's a mobile application, whether that's an IoT device, whether that's an S3 bucket. We found credentials laying around in all these places.
Wow. Wait, so because I think I just realized we've been talking about secret management from an advanced level for some time on how complex it could be as well. But on the podcast, we also have some people who may be new to the industry as well, and that's cool. We kind of started for them. But where can people find out about the secret management space? Where can they learn about this kind of a thing, conversation, I guess?
Yeah, I think so. Like I've started a YouTube channel where I'm starting to share some stories around secrets management. I'm talking about some of the open source tools we're putting out, things like that. The company name is TruffleSecurity. You can find us on Twitter at TruffleSec. You can find us on YouTube. So we love to talk about those types of things. That's a great place to start. Our open source tools as well, I mentioned, can be used on an individual basis. You don't have to go work at a corporate enterprise to use these things. You can use them personally to go out and find bug bounties. You can scan repositories, you can scan S3 buckets, you can scan paste bins. It's very flexible and powerful, and a lot of those capabilities are actually going to be open sourcing in just like the next week or 2 or 3 or so, nice. Which we're super excited about. And so I think that's what I would recommend. Get your hand on the tool. Go find the keys that companies are leaking out, because the number of keys you can find just for Google dorking is still staggering, right? If you just type password equals or whatever with the right Google dorking, you can find tons and tons of keys leaked out that way. I think that is kind of how I got into it, right? Was just this bug bounty thing of just going out and finding all the keys that were leaking out, responsibly disclosing them to companies, some of them paying me a little bit of side scratch for doing that. So that was a great way for me to get into it. And I definitely, follow us on all those places, and you can see all the new open source tools as we put them out. We recently put out this new tool called Driftwood. And what this tool does is it inventories every single SSL public key that's used for TLS. So all of those are logged in a public ledger. We went down and downloaded like billions of public keys for all those different SSL keys. And then we went to GitHub and we downloaded everyone's public SSH key for all 34 million users. So if you use GitHub and you upload an SSH key there, they allow you to actually download those keys. And so we downloaded all of those public keys, and we created this massive database of billions and billions of different public keys. So then when you go out and look for a private key, an RSA private key, whether you find it laying around in a paste bin or an S3 bucket or a Git or wherever, you can instantly hit this free API using this open source tool and see whether or not it pairs with something sensitive or not. As individual employees, we've all played around with the technology, and we found, as one example, a key that belonged to Oracle that could be used to access an individual's account that could push directly to sensitive Oracle repositories. And we disclosed that to them. They paid out a bounty for it, I believe, and they're about to credit the employee who found the key. So these tools that we're giving out, I highly recommend, if you're getting into secret stuff, play around with them, because there's a ton of bug bounty money and a ton of potential for you to be able to find sensitive keys. And we're just making it easier and easier with the more tools we put out.
Awesome. No, a great answer as well. And I think probably bug bounty is always a great place to, I guess, learn a few new tools as well. So I would definitely encourage people to check that out as well. That's pretty much what I wanted to kind of talk about on the show as well, man. But I've got my infamous 3 questions for you as well towards the end, which is a fun section. I wonder if your answers have changed since we kind of haven't had you for some time here. I do remember you flipped the script on me last time as well, so I'm prepared for that as well, in case you decide to flip the script again. So the first one, sorry.
I was going to say, like, last time I feel like I had studied ahead of time. Like, I knew that these questions were coming. I prepared for them. This time I forgot. I don't have the questions to get back to you. You're catching me off guard, which is what you always do. So perfect. You win this round.
This is perfect. All right. So I'm going to enjoy these questions now. So what do you spend most time on when you're not working on secrets or technology?
Good question. Recently, I've been getting into crab fishing a little bit with my co-founder. Nice. And so as it turns out, that is a relatively easy thing to get into. I thought it would be more complicated, but you just put a little bit of bait in a big hoop net, you throw it into the water, you wait 15 minutes, and then you got dinner 15 minutes later. So
really?
That's been kind of fun to do. Yeah.
Okay, I didn't realize it was that easy. Okay, all right, that's great. I mean, maybe something I should explore as well. Next question: what is something that you're proud of but is not on your social media since the last time you came in?
Good question. That is not on my social media. Well, I guess like since the last time I came in, this is a bad answer, but recently we were awarded the Forbes 30 Under 30 award, but it is on my social media. That's why it's a bad answer. So I don't know. I can answer that one. I guess there's some really awesome bug bounty things that I've disclosed to companies that will be on my social media, but I can't talk about yet. So those are pretty exciting.
Oh, cool. All right. So undisclosed yet?
Yeah, well, they're disclosed to the company, but not disclosed to the public. Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, right, sweet, cool. All right, no, that's a decent answer, man. Last question, but not the last one. Least one. What's your favorite cuisine or restaurant that you can share?
I feel like that's the hardest question you ask, right? It's like asking what somebody's favorite color is. It's like, I'm a grown up. I like lots of things. I like all the colors. Don't make me pick one. Like what?
Oh, wait, so I wonder during the COVID times, during while in a lot of people were in I guess self-inflicted isolation, I guess. Did you end up learning a lot more cuisines to make yourself, or?
Yeah, I've been doing a ton of cooking. So I think like I don't know if people use the We app, the grocery delivery app, that is like becoming more and more popular. They open up more and more regions, and now it ships to a whole bunch of U.S. cities. I use that to buy a lot of like Asian groceries and cuisine. They're like
Nice.
Asian grocery store that's online and do like delivery. So there's a fair amount of that. I think I also live near a bunch of good sushi places. So of course, like that's always going to be near and
Definitely.
dear to my heart. I think last time I answered Ethiopian.
Yep.
That's never a bad choice. So I, definitely still like Ethiopian. But again, like hard question. Of course, I love tacos. All the food. That's my answer. All of them. I like all of them.
Yeah, I think you and I are very similar on that one, where it would be really hard to answer what's our favorite cuisine. And me, that's why I asked this question as well, because I think I love all kinds of food. I love trying all kinds of food as well. But it's such a hard answer. That's why I normally answer what's my favorite restaurant, but that depends on the city as well. So that's pretty hard to answer as well. But Jude, I enjoyed this really conversation. I think I feel everyone else did as well. Where can people find you to connect with you and maybe talk more secret management and crab fishing?
Maybe I should post more about crab fishing. So, obviously the company is TruffleSec, that's linked, but you can also find me individually at Insecure Nature is my Twitter handle. And recently, like you mentioned, I've been making some YouTube videos that talk about I try to keep it relatively novel. So the content we put out is talking about new tooling that nobody had access to before, or it's talking about a new security subject that people haven't talked about before. I might change that up in the future. I might make some more like, fundamental, here's how to do these kind of things, basic. But for right now, feel free to check out that YouTube channel and see some of the novel security stuff that we talk about.
Sweet. Thanks for sharing that. I'll put the link to your YouTube channel in the show notes as well. But thanks so much for coming in, man. And that's pretty much what we had time for, everyone. I'll see you all for another episode of Identity Access Management next weekend. It is going to be very close to Australia Day for people who are falling in Australia. But just letting you know, we're continuing our Identity Access Management month. And definitely check out TruffleSec with Dylan the next time you're around thinking about secrets and secret management. Awesome. All right. Have a great evening. Have a great day to anyone who's listening. But we'll see you all next time. See ya. Peace.